firm. You get a firm. Big booty bitch for you.
Now back to the Jenny McCarthy Show, exclusively on SiriusXM Stars.
Oh my God!
Better work.
Love it. Welcome back to the Jenny McCarthy Show. I'm Jenny McCarthy Wahlberg. You guys, in a little bit, we're going to have some Keeping Up with the Kardashian update. Also, if you missed SNL, don't worry. We got the best of clips coming up, including the backpack kid. Love it. Also, we're going to discuss Sugar, how to blast it out with the #1 selling book by Dr. Ian Smith. Also, what are the signs of a successful relationship? Are you in one? None of these signs come up. You might need to get the hell out of Dodge. You know what I'm saying? Joining me on the show, I could not wait to talk to this young man. Paul Louden wrote a book, Behind the Locked Door, Understanding My Life as an Autistic. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited to get through your book. This is something that I, as a mother of a child who's on the spectrum, I feel I've almost been waiting for you. I've been waiting for an adult to really help me understand what goes on in the mind. And I know everybody is different, and you can't blanket explain for everyone, but you can absolutely give us a brief overview of what it's like, correct?
And that's really what it's about, is the book isn't telling you this is how people like me think, it's telling you this is how I think. I'm hoping you'll notice some different things that make you go, aha, I didn't realize someone could see things that way at all, that gives you the ideas to go, well, maybe this other thing that's happening in my life, Paul didn't talk about it, but it gives me some ideas that it could be much more different than I really expected.
And how old are you right now, Paul, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 34.
34. Okay, so you're much older than the wave of children now. When you were diagnosed, although you were diagnosed later in life, correct?
Yeah, I was diagnosed at 23, a combination of moving around a lot, so there was always, well, he's just adapting, the wave of ADD, ADHD diagnoses in the late 90s, which I had, and just generally being high enough functioning that, the challenges I had were always sort of like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I never quite landed on the right thing.
Were you able to be in regular classrooms, or were you in special ed?
I was in regular classrooms. Again, there was a lot of moving around. Half of the, quote, regular classrooms were overseas in Indonesia and Pakistan. My 8th grade class was 3 other students, It wasn't typical by any means.
That had to make it so much more difficult for you.
In some ways, yes, but we got a lot of individual attention. The schedule had a different sort of flexibility. I mean, when I was in Indonesia, some of the classes, we were allowed to progress at our own rate as long as we didn't fall behind. And so in areas where I had strengths, I was actually able to move ahead of the rest of my class and didn't have that issue of frustration where I was trying to pace myself and match with the other people around me. So, there were different strengths and weaknesses. And then when I got back to the States, I had seen enough of people being different that I was sort of able to go, well, okay, I'm clearly different, but I recognize that people are different. And so when everyone was expecting me to be the same, I at least had built up some of that strength of having seen a lot of it beforehand.
I was going to say, because you sound very, very high functioning and a good. Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying that's one of the things I like to talk about. Is one of my strengths is my verbal ability. A lot of my challenges, which I go into in the book, are things that I learned to hide and cover up largely. But once I got out on my own, graduated from high school, tried to go to college, that's when everything fell apart, because a lot of the other things that we have challenges with, the motivational issues, episodic memory, things like that, they really, held me back. I wasn't able to be flexible enough in my day-to-day life. I wasn't able to keep up with college and things like that. And so I ended up, the anxiety of having to write a check because my power bill was a check only. I couldn't pay it with a credit card. The anxiety of trying to do that meant that often I wouldn't pay it until after the power had been cut off and I had to drive out somewhere to do it. There were a lot of challenges where it's like, I sound fine, but if I didn't end up with the support system I had, I would absolutely be homeless right now. I have permanent dentures from not taking care of my teeth. I have a lot of, really serious impacts. So it's important in my advocacy to remind people it doesn't matter how someone sounds. Take them at their word when they say they're struggling.
So happy you said that, and you said it so eloquently also. And if you don't mind me asking a personal question, but this also, I'm sure will resonate with parents who have kids on the spectrum. Like my son is very excited for summer, like all children are, but I notice every summer, because there's not a schedule of things to do, he kind of loses it. And he even last summer he had panic attacks. He didn't quite know what to do with himself, even though, like, I'm saying your friends are coming over today. He felt like he looked like he was swimming in an ocean and drowning, and I did not know how to help him because I'm like, it's summer, you get to do whatever you want. And I'm realizing I don't know if he needs a schedule. I don't want to ask you that. Is it healthy for me to help him have a schedule, or is it helpful for me to just let him figure it out?
And that's always a difficult one, but one of the big things is, like, that's a big shift from schedule to absolutely no schedule. I had the advantage when I was younger. Like I said, we lived overseas. So every summer was a trip back to the United States, and I'd know for 2 weeks we're with these grandparents, for 2 weeks with these grandparents, for 4 weeks here we're staying at a rented place, and whatever. Like, there was a clear schedule for almost all of my summers. And I think that was beneficial. I know a lot of people on the spectrum really benefit from something like a schedule to reduce anxiety. The obvious goal is to build that flexibility where you don't necessarily need the schedule, but it's sort of a small steps thing. I tell people, rather than trying to push them into areas where they're uncomfortable, work on ideas for building their confidence, where, a lot of us on the spectrum, we have these really intense interests, whether it be, video games or washing machines or model trains or whatever, is give us a chance to lead in those areas where we already have some confidence. Because, like you said, he was having anxiety attacks and things like that. A large experience of life for those of us on the spectrum is that our decisions end badly. We know that, we think we've learned something. We try it, it blows up. We try to learn something new. We try it, it blows up. That, by the time you're teenage or older, you start, going, what? I don't want to make decisions. The only decision I can safely make is hide and don't do anything. So when someone pushes us to make decisions, it can be immensely uncomfortable. And so the idea there is, give them the chance to lead when they want to lead, at least long enough to build up that confidence that they can make decisions that have positive outcomes. Because until you know things can go right, you don't want to try.
I'm talking to Paul Louden. He has a new book, Behind the Locked Door, Understanding My Life as an Autistic. You also mentioned hygiene, and I find this interesting because I have told, my son for years and tried every method possible, from posters to smiley faces to gifts to you name it, to just pick up the towel off the floor, put your clothes in the laundry basket, brush your teeth, wash your armpits. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've said it over the past few years. And I don't get frustrated with him because I know his brain works differently than mine. I'm just really lost as to how to get through to him so he can someday learn how to do it.
And again, that's one of those things where, when you're trying to address all of the things, attention, there's not enough attention for any of them. That, you're trying to divide a mind that's only ready to handle one or two of these things among 20 of them. I mean, picking up a towel is such a small thing to a typical person, but to an autistic person, it's another of the million things that you don't really, at a deep level, get why it's important, but someone has told you to do it. And so, you got to sort of work from first causes that, say, okay, trust me on this one, take a shower every day or whatever, and don't worry about the little bits yet, but we're going to work on, what do you want from life? Well, if you want to date, which is something a lot of autistic people eventually want to do, you want the other person to be comfortable around you, and you you may say, hey, look, I'm autistic. I want you to try to talk plainly and avoid, gray area reasoning. But one thing they're going to want from you is that you smell good and look good. I know that for me, showering regularly is still a challenge, but I'm lucky enough that I don't have to leave my house every day. And so I've told myself that I'll try to keep myself fairly clean regularly, but the absolute requirement is that if I'm going out to be among people, I take a shower before I go. And it's one of those things where I'll give myself ground here because all of these activities drain my energy. Everything I have to do to sort of keep up appearances drains my energy. And if I drain too much, I can't keep up with any of it. So it's very much a balancing act. And so I've learned what works for me. And part of that can be, what can work for other people is prioritizing, saying these things are important, these things are not. The towel thing, it'd be great if he picked up the towel, but for now we're going to let that go until we've got some other things moved from having to be, intentionally doing them to does them without any anxiety.
Got it. That makes so much sense. Don't just try to get it all in there. Really focus on one thing, accomplish it, and then move to the next.
I mean, I just cleaned up my living room, and I had the hardest time tidying up my living room until I read a piece of advice that says, don't try to clean your living room. Pick a surface and try to clean that surface. Don't worry about anything else. Just pick, a countertop or a couch or whatever. Clean up the things on that. Then, if you have more energy, pick another surface and do that until you're done with whatever amount you can do. And this wasn't, a piece of advice for autistic people or anything, but it worked fantastically for me that, just focus on one thing at a time. Don't let the scope of the project even be in your mind. And it worked really well for me.
That is such a smart piece of advice. The book, again, is called Behind the Locked Door, Understanding My Life as an Autistic. You brought up dating, and I can't wait to ask you about this because my son is right in that prime age that is just so wanting to be with girls. And I've absolutely used the scenario of girls do not want to make out with you if you have, socks on your teeth, the dirt on your teeth. So you gotta brush your teeth. So he's totally now brushing his teeth. That worked because I explained why, like you said. Mm-hmm. But in terms of finding girls, I'm so concerned of how much do I have to be involved helping him or not at all?
And that's a challenging one as well. Like a lot of people on the autism spectrum want to date before they're ready. Everyone wants to date before you're ready. Your typical teenager, he's not ready to date when he wants to date. It's just a given that, we don't know what's going on. The typical experience is you make mistakes and you learn. But with autism, it can be harder to integrate good information from those mistakes. And a lot of times our upbringing poses us to make these mistakes. If you look at every romantic comedy out there, the relationship in most romantic comedies is not a healthy relationship. It's a guy pestering a girl until she's willing to go out with him. One of the big challenges we face is that we've learned bad lessons about romance. A typical person picks up things around them better than an autistic person does. So they see their family, their aunts, their uncles, their parents, friends of the family, friends, and their relationships, and they learn that there's more to a relationship. But a lot of times for a person with autism, the relationship itself, just getting a girlfriend, is the goal. They aren't even certain what goes on past getting a girlfriend. Sure, there's, the physical element, but they don't understand what a relationship is. So, part of the key isn't really trying to help them get a relationship so much as help them recognize why they want one and what they want from it and what it means to be in a relationship, that it's composed of compromise, of give and take, that it's not like they show in the movies, because then whether they succeed or fail, it puts them on the path towards actually being able to have that negotiation with another person in the first place.
That makes so much sense. I mean, I absolutely know this, that kids on the spectrum, especially the young ones, model behavior they see in cartoons, be it negative. If SpongeBob smashes Patrick over the head, I've watched them imitate it or do complete quotes. Movie quotes is another big thing. They do rote memorization. They are able to generalize and use it in their life, but a lot of what they see I think is very important, especially when they're young. Do you agree?
And that's relatively true, that those of us on the autism spectrum, we take comfort in absolutes, in black and white thinking. It's just a known thing about us. And that means that, if we gain information that explicitly says this is how you do it, we're more likely to trust that information than trying to figure it out for ourselves. Because, again, the black and white thinking makes it easier for us. Then when it goes wrong, we, run into significant difficulties. And so, it is important then that parents and people around us be more explicit about about the message we receive, because we're very likely to take things in absolutes. That if someone tells me that was the wrong thing to do, I learned that my decision-making process is wrong. This is a story I tell to a lot of people, is that when I was younger, I didn't know how to decide where to go eat when someone asked me, "Where do you want to eat, Paul?" Because I'd seen other people come up with, an answer immediately. That some part of their brain would go, "Yeah, I'm in the mood for tacos today," or whatever. So they say, "Okay, how about Taco Bell?" For me, I was like, "Okay, I don't know what I want to eat. Everyone else can answer this immediately. So it's clear that I don't know how to figure out where to go eat because I can't do it immediately." And so I just decided I don't know. I can never know what I want to eat unless something is immediately in my mind about it. And so I didn't think I could answer that question. And so it's sort of just really important to make sure to provide that information of why and have sort of a bit deeper communication about what's going on, so that we can see the underlying processes and help better reinforce and develop our own ones.
There was something that Evan recently taught me, and not by explanation, by just witnessing it. And this is fascinating. It goes with what you're saying, with kind of black and white thinking. I taught him that, these certain chips I found out can cause cancer. I'm like, you're not eating those anymore. Like everything's causing cancer these days. But I was just like, you can't have these. So cut to, 8 months later, it's Christmas. That's all they have, some of these particular types of chips. And I said, go ahead and just have them. And he was like, what? No! Are you crazy? And I go, he could not understand for the life of him why I would just turn around and switch like that. And it made me realize, oh my God, he's so black and white that must be so confusing for him. Like, oh, you know what? You can have this cancer thing once. Like, it didn't make any sense. And now when I look at it, it doesn't make any sense for his brain.
That's one of those things is the idea of acceptable risks. I kind of hate to bring it up on your show, but the vaccine thing, I know you have one opinion on it, and I have a different opinion on the science behind it, but there's also the question of how it affects those of us with autism when people talk about it. Because, like, for me and a lot of people I've met, when we hear someone say, you know what, I don't want my kid to be vaccinated because it might cause autism, what I hear is like, okay, so, let's assume that vaccines do cause autism. The alternative is diseases that can cause death. So I fear, like, you'd rather risk my life than risk me having autism. That's not about me. That's about your comfort as a parent. And so it's really uncomfortable for a lot of us in the autism community, adults and individuals who have started thinking about this, especially part of it may be our black and white thinking, but it's still how it comes into us, is that we've got this conversation going on around us that doesn't involve us, where people talk about risking our lives rather than having people turn out like us. And I'm like, look, even the kids with extremely low functioning autism, they can play with things and have happiness. A kid who dies from mumps, whooping cough, whatever, they don't get to have happiness. They don't get to have anything. And so it's sort of like this conversation goes on around us. And that actually ties into a lot of my advocacy, is that a lot of times we aren't talked about like we're people. We're talked about like we are a disorder, and we aren't involved in the discussions about us. And so I really want to push out there and help people see us as involved.
We have talked about that, and I would love to have you come to our conference. We have a Generation Rescue conference coming up where we have speakers, but we've talked about this multiple times. Unfortunately, it doesn't get picked up by as much media as possible, where we talk about, our kids are saying, like, what's wrong? Why don't you want us to have this? Like, why is it such a bad thing? And what we've try to explain over and over again is what we're trying to do is fix the kids that are actually not feeling good, sick. If I were to rename it, I would rename it something else because I don't think it's this particular thing. These kids have like Crohn's disease, these bowel issues. There's severe comorbid conditions associated with it. I would take autism without all of those comorbid conditions. The comorbid conditions are the ones that we are trying so desperately to fix. And that's where the confusion gets mixed in with the media. We accept our kids for who they are, but when our kids have to have a feeding tube because they can't have any food, we're saying, what in the hell? And you're turning us away. So that's where I think there's massive confusion. And I understand your side completely. And if I was you, absolutely. And Evan has said the same thing. And I say, no, we're fixing when you're not feeling good, when there's those conditions associated with it. I would love to have you come speak because we have one of the biggest conferences in the country once a year, and it's thousands and thousands of parents, like 10,000 parents, that I would love for them to hear what you have to say on this matter, because our kids are growing up and they are hearing us say those things. And maybe you can help us move the conversation to get out into the media the correct way.
And for me, that is one of the important things about autism, is recognizing that there's sort of, in my mind, there's three parts of autism. There's the identity part. We think differently, we process the world differently, we're okay with that. There's the disability part of autism, where if autism is severe enough, it impedes our ability to live the lives that we want to live. And I'm all for treating the disability part, the part where you talk with the person who has autism, find out what they want to be as a person, and help them reach that goal and overcoming the symptoms that interfere. And then, as you said, there are the comorbid conditions. I have some some pretty frustrating bowel issues that really cause me difficulty when traveling. I don't eat typically before I leave to the airport or any time that day until I've arrived at where I'm going, because I don't want to have to run to the restroom anywhere. And so, I struggle with some of these things, and I'm all for looking for biomedical solutions to the comorbid conditions. They're definitely significant. I know that, epilepsy is a big one. I know that there are a lot of other big ones. I also struggle with depression and anxiety, and it wasn't until last year that I finally found a medication that helps me manage the depression to a level where I can function better. So I know there's a lot going on that does have biomedical solutions, but it's one of those things where the conversation right now factors so much on, quote, preventing autism, that, it really impacts the ability to talk about, positive treatment, when all we hear is, wow, autism is so bad for the parents and family. And it's like, look, we're people too. And when people are putting the comfort of the mother who might have to care for us over us, it really minimizes our view of ourselves as actual people.
100% understand that. Like, I absolutely get your point of view and agree with it to an extent. And I think it's a larger conversation that we have to have at our conference. But I understand you, and trust me, as my son's getting older, I want that dialogue to get changed. And really, the people that I talk to every day with Generation Rescue are these moms that are crying. They have 3 sons with autism that are 19, 21, and 24. They're still in diapers, and they're not speaking. So I'm really around the thick of it, who don't have any language, and that's why they call it a spectrum disorder. There's so many different ends. So if we can find a way to meet in the middle, I think it'd be a wonderful thing for you to come and speak to these parents. Paul Louden, thank you so much. The book is called Behind the Locked Door, Understanding My Life as an Autistic. You guys can go to, is it Louden? Autism.com?
Louden, Louden, on autism.com.
What a wonderful conversation with you today. And to be continued, I'd love to have you come join us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Paul. We'll be right back, you guys.